Our meeting. It's consumed Washington for more than a year. Now the man who holds the key to how it all happened shares new details.
It was a dirty offer that they accepted.
Yes, that is true.
Is the meeting the special counsel's best evidence of possible collusion between the campaign and Russia? We go inside the room with a first-hand account.
Suddenly, what should have been two people and Don Jr. was now Don, Manafort, Jared.
Who would have their campaign manager, their son-in-law, all attend this meeting to talk about adoptions? It just didn't make sense.
The receptivity for dirt on Hillary could have been used as a green light back at the Kremlin.
Most campaigns never would have taken that meeting. This campaign was happy to take it.
He's talked to Congress, the Mueller team, the grand jury, and now to us. Rob Goldstone with the inside story of the Trump Tower meeting.
So tell us what happened. Was the dirt on Hillary Clinton forthcoming?
It was the email that set off a chain of events leading to the meeting. Just a few sentences long, but every word subject to intense scrutiny and speculation.
Would you read it to us?
Sure. Good morning. Emin just called and asked me to contact you with something very interesting. The Crown Prosecutor of Russia met with his father Araz this morning, and in their meeting offered to provide the Trump campaign with some official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia and would be very useful to your father.
The father, of course, then candidate Donald Trump. And the email's author? An unlikely man to be in the center of what would become a political firestorm. Rob Goldstone sat down with NBC News' Cynthia McFadden to tell his story.
You have been called a wide variety of names over the past year. Useful idiot, dunce, clown, bonkers, puppet of the Kremlin, sinister. Any of that fit?
I've been called much more than that as well. And, ultimately I was a publicist who wrote an email on behalf of my client.
But it's not just Goldstone's words that have the attention of special counsel Robert Mueller. It's the response from the president's son.
Donald Trump Jr. said, if it's what you say, I love it.
His reaction to that was not to say, is this all right? Should I call the FBI?
It's potentially criminal. It's embarrassing. It's a scandal.
This meeting in some ways goes to sort of the heart of what Robert Mueller has been looking at. He was appointed to look at any connections that existed between the Trump campaign and Russia.
There wasn't anybody higher in the Trump campaign except Donald Trump himself at this meeting.
So how did a celebrity publicist wind up as a central player in that Trump Tower conference room, and later as a witness in Mueller's grand jury room? His background is far removed from politics.
He was at one point in time a reporter. He got his first job for his local newspaper at the age of 16. He then became a radio reporter focusing on the entertainment industry. At some point he realized that he kind of had a knack for promotion.
Rob Goldstone grew up in Manchester, England in public housing, but he wound up rubbing elbows with the stars, including one of the world's most famous recording artists, Michael Jackson. And when he moved to New York in the 1990s, Goldstone's larger-than-life personality didn't go unnoticed.
He's a wacky guy. He was really fond of social media and would post all kinds of funny things, taking selfies, wearing funny hats.
He invited me to a roast at the Friars Club. And when I got there, he said, it turns out they don't want press here, you're gonna have to leave. And I was very hurt. But he said, let me make it up to you. I also handle the Russian tea room, which I now find amusing. And let me hook you up with a dinner there.
Goldstone worked in Trump's hometown, but their first connection ran through Moscow, with a family that's been described as the Trumps of Russia, Aras Agalarov and his son, Emin.
Explain who Emin is. Emin Agalarov, his father, one of the most powerful men in Russia.
He's a billionaire pop singer who also happens to be a hugely successful businessman in his own right.
Music has no language. I will do a song in Russian and the audience that doesn't speak Russian still responds.
He runs and operates shopping malls and fashion brands and restaurants, including co-owning Nobu with Robert De Niro and with Chef Nobu. So he's a pretty interesting character to begin with.
And how Emin-led to Trump takes a detour through the world of beauty pageants. Miss Universe.
Emin and I went to meet with the Miss Universe organization in Manhattan about getting a co-star for a video.
And they asked for the most beautiful woman in the world. They also had a conversation about where the next Miss Universe contest would be.
And Emin says, why not Moscow? My father and I own this big concert hall in Moscow. Why don't we do that instead?
And he went, let's do it. You'll have your contest. Rob will organize it. And that's it.
The idea went all the way to the top of the Miss Universe organization, to Donald Trump.
Donald Trump loved the idea, said, make it work.
The Aguilerovs traveled to the States in June 2013. Goldstone was on hand for the introductions.
I remember I was in the lobby of the Trump Hotel in Vegas waiting for the Aguilerovs to arrive. They walked through the door. Donald Trump was at the other end of the lobby and screamed, bellowed, "The richest man in Russia has come to see me." I thought that was hilarious. At the time, I think Araz was the 54th richest man in Russia.
He sounds kind of giddy about the whole thing.
He was a bit excited. I suppose in a way at the time I thought he was making a fuss of them. He was trying to make them feel welcome, which he did.
Goldstone says that while celebrating the pageant deal during dinner, the conversation took an off-color turn.
He said to Emin something along the lines of, I'll take $1 million off the cost of this pageant right now if you tell me if you've ever slept with any of the contestants. And he said this smiling. And Emin went, interesting. And then he smiled and he said, Mr. Trump, I'll increase the fee by $5 million if you tell me if you've ever slept with any contestants. And everybody laughed. But I thought, this is kind of like a match made in frat boy heaven on some level.
That was the start of a friendship that spanned years and continents and would ultimately land Goldstone at that Trump Tower meeting. Coming up,
happy birthday.
Donald Trump in Moscow with the pop star and the publicist. The man who arranged the Trump Tower meeting is telling his version of events in a new book, and to NBC News' senior legal and investigative correspondent, Cynthia McFadden.
I wanted to tell my story, and by that I mean my story. I thought without context, this story would never make sense.
He says an important part of his story took place 3 years before the meeting, in Moscow. There, he saw a growing relationship between Donald Trump and the family of a Russian oligarch.
One reason that Donald Trump was so keen to hold this contest in Moscow was because he would be doing it with Aras Aguilarov, a billionaire developer.
Journalist David Korn has reported extensively on Trump's relationship to Russia.
In fact, people within the Miss Universe organization, as they told me later, all assumed that holding Miss Universe in Moscow was a way for Trump to further his business interests there.
Trump traveled to Moscow in 2013 for the pageant. The trip would only last a day and a half, but it would impact Trump's business and perhaps his presidency. Rob Goldstone was there with his client, Emin Aguilarov, whose father co-sponsored the Moscow pageant and arranged for Trump to meet with a group of Russian businessmen.
We met him in front of Nobu in Moscow, and he came upstairs and received a very warm welcome initially. And Mr. Trump was asked a few questions. One of them was about his view on President Putin. And he said that he believed that the Russians had a strong leader in President Putin, unlike America, whose leader was weak. And he was referring to President Obama. And I think this came about at a time when nobody had anything good to say about either Vladimir Putin or Russia.
One guest then asked Trump about the Greek financial crisis.
Mr. Trump stood up and said, before I answer that, have any of you heard of The Apprentice? It's a show that I created, and he talked for about maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes about The Apprentice, how amazing it was, how amazing he was, thanked them for coming, and got a standing ovation.
Was Mr. Trump as excited to be with these Russians as they seemed to be with him?
He seemed to be, yes. He seemed to like the fact that he was adored there. And these are people who are some of the sternest people I've ever seen in my life. Loved him.
We've been having a great time.
The remainder of Trump's day was filled with pageant press. That night,
Happy birthday. Fantastic guy.
he went to a birthday party for Aras Aguilera. He left around 1 a.m., and what happened over the next several hours in Moscow has been the subject of intrigue and innuendo. Trump had a suite booked at the Ritz-Carlton, Moscow.
The Ritz-Carlton Moscow is a notorious honey trap that American officials say Russian intelligence has every room wired for video and sound. And there's this allegation that he cavorted with prostitutes there, which he denies and has yet to be proven.
The allegation is in the Steele dossier, opposition research initially paid for by a conservative website and then funded by Democrats.
The most salacious item in the dossier focused on this trip that Trump took for the contest. And that was that he hired prostitutes and had them urinate in the hotel room that he was staying because Obama had stayed there. And they were defiling where Obama had slept, walked, gone to the bathroom, or whatever.
The report claims that night the Russian government gathered compromise, material to blackmail Trump.
Former FBI Director James Comey has said that Donald Trump told him he did not stay overnight at the Ritz-Carlton in Moscow.
That is not correct.
He did spend the night.
He did spend the night. That's where he was dropped off by the security detail that we provided, and that's where he was at 7 a.m. the next morning.
Trump's bodyguard, Keith Schiller, told Congress he was approached by someone who offered to arrange prostitutes. Schiller says he declined.
Keith Schiller, according to his own testimony, told Trump about the offer. They laughed about it. Trump went into his hotel room alone.
So to the best of your knowledge, the allegations in the Steele dossier?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, I don't have knowledge, but to the best of my knowledge, we had him all day, we had him all night, so there's about 4 or 5 hours that are unaccounted for. In my mind, he must have slept at some point, because he didn't look like someone who hadn't slept when I saw him the next day. But I have no idea, maybe it could have happened, but again, I've never heard any word of it.
There's no proof of a compromising video. But one video that does exist was shot the very next morning. Donald Trump made a cameo in Emin's music video, In Another Life.
Emin, wake up. Come on. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you, Emin?
After that shoot, Trump did a series of interviews and talked about Putin.
Let's not kid ourselves. He's done an amazing job. He's put himself at the forefront of the world as a leader.
His chief concern when he was in Moscow was whether he would meet Vladimir Putin as soon as he landed. Are we going to see Putin? When do we see Putin? Is Putin coming to the event?
But that meeting never happened.
I was in the room for that call with Mr. Trump and with Emin, Raz, and it was President Putin's spokesman, a man by the name of Dmitry Peskov, and Emin translated and said, unfortunately, although Mr. Putin would love to meet with Donald Trump today, the meeting can no longer go ahead because the King of Holland has been delayed in traffic.
What was Donald Trump's reaction when it turned out he wasn't going to be meeting President
It was
Putin?
okay, actually, because I think his reaction would have been really upset if there'd been no response. But the fact that this man, who's a very senior official, was conveying a message, I would love to meet you, on the next possible occasion, and why don't you come to the Olympics?
The Miss Universe pageant, which was co-owned by NBC back then, did go on.
Congratulations to you, Miss Venezuela. Good night, everybody from Moscow.
And then it ends with he and the Aguilaros announcing that they're going to join together to try to build a Trump Tower in Moscow.
Despite his delighted tweet about the project, Trump Tower Moscow never happened. But Goldstone says the friendships from Moscow continued. He got to know Don Jr. and 3 times visited the elder Trump at Trump Tower. On one visit, not long before Donald Trump declared his candidacy, Goldstone says Trump was there listening to a rap song.
He said, look, 90 million views. A rapper called Mac Miller, who recently passed away, has recorded this song, Donald Trump, and it's had 90 million YouTube views, and it's about me. And I said to him, do you think you maybe should listen to the words and what they're saying about you, perhaps? Just an idea? Look at all this money, ain't that some... And he went, doesn't matter, 90 million views. And then the third time we went, he said to Emin, maybe next time I see you, I'll be hosting you at the White House.
But before there was Trump in the White House, there was Trump the candidate. And the next time Goldstone set foot in Trump Tower would be when he arrived for the meeting. Coming up,
I get a phone call, and he said to me initially, I'd like you to set up a meeting with the Trumps.
Sergeyarov and his son Emin. So if you wanted to get a message to the Trump campaign from the Russia side, those are the people you'd go to.
According to Goldstone, during their call, Emin said that a well-connected attorney from Russia had damaging information about the Democrats.
I knew in my mind when someone's saying well-connected and you want a campaign meeting with the Trumps, well, who else are they connected to? It's obviously the government, in my mind. So I was taken aback. First, because Emin and I, we'd worked together maybe 3+ years, had never even had a conversation about politics. We'd had conversation about Donald Trump, but not about politics.
And in Donald Trump, Goldstone admits, he saw opportunities that had little to do with government.
Selfishly, I thought if Donald Trump is elected president, that's amazing. There's lots of favors we could ask. I'd like Emin to play at the inauguration. I'd like to do a photo shoot with Emin at the White House. Those are the favors I would like to ask, not some random attorney that you have this bizarre, scant amount of information. So I was really against this thing, but I managed him.
Instead of approaching the candidate directly, he decided to approach the candidate's son, Donald Trump Jr. That's when he typed out those 138 words that would later be scrupulously examined.
Good morning. Emin just called and asked me to contact you with something very interesting. The Crown Prosecutor of Russia met with his father, Araz, this morning, and in their meeting offered to provide the Trump campaign with some official documents and information. This is obviously very high-level and sensitive information, but is part of Russia and its government support for Mr. Trump.
Goldstone now admits some of the details were not true.
All right, the first sentence, Emin just called and asked me to contact you. That's true.
That is true.
The Crown Prosecutor of Russia, not true.
It's not true. What it is my interpretation. What I was talking about was this attorney from Russia.
So you then say that they are offering to provide the Trump campaign with some, quote, official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary in her dealings with Russia and would be very useful to your father. What parts of that are true?
So what is true is the call. So what Emin had said was potentially damaging it to the Democrats. So the Democrats only had one candidate, which was Hillary Clinton. I also was writing this to the son of somebody who was a reality TV star, who was running for president, and who most people, most polls, believed had as much chance of becoming president as myself.
So very little.
Very little, thank you for that, very little. So this wasn't an email to the son of the President of the United States. If it had been, I might have spent a little bit more time on it. This was written in about 3 minutes on my cell phone, interpreting what I believe my client was trying to get across and puffing it. That's what I do, I'm a publicist.
The strategy worked. 17 minutes after Goldstone's email, the future president's son responded with these words.
If it's what you say, I love it.
Campaigns accept opposition research all the time, but most campaign professionals will tell you they wouldn't accept it from a foreign government or a foreign intelligence service. That's just something that's considered out of bounds in American politics.
How are you guys? Thanks for coming by.
And if the email lacked specifics, Trump Jr. had at least 3 opportunities to clarify the details.
There's a clear trail within the phone records that shows that Donald Trump Jr. and Emin Agalarov connected by phone, but Donald Trump Jr. testified under oath to Congress that he doesn't remember those calls. He has no recollection.
According to phone records obtained by the Senate Judiciary Committee, while he was communicating with Emin, Trump Jr. also had a phone call with a blocked number.
We know that Donald Trump uses a blocked number, so the big question is, did he speak to his father? All we know is what the records show. Don Jr. connected with Agalarov, and in between those calls, he spoke to a blocked number.
After that, the meeting was set. June 9th, Trump Tower. Goldstone would bring the Russian lawyer. Trump Jr. said he'd bring the candidate's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and campaign chair Paul Manafort. Before joining the Trump campaign, Manafort worked as a political consultant for oligarchs and pro-Russian clients.
The person that's of interest to me, frankly, is Mr. Manafort. He's been in Russia, he's been in Ukraine. If Donald Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner took this meeting innocently and ignorantly and sort of stepped into it, it's possible. But Mr. Manafort, he would have clearly known what the Russians are up to.
2 nights before the meeting, on June 7th, Trump greeted supporters with what now sounds like a curious promise.
We're going to be discussing all of the things that have taken place with the Clintons. I think you're going to find it very informative and very, very interesting.
We just don't know if the speech that Donald Trump made is a coincidence or not, and so the timing seems awfully strange.
For all the attention the Trump Tower meeting would later get, Goldstone says at the time, he hardly gave it a second thought.
I didn't care about the meeting. It sounds bad, but it's true. I didn't care. I wanted my client to be happy. That's always my ultimate goal.
Coming up.
So tell us what happened. Was the dirt on the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton forthcoming?
Most of my friends are die-hard liberals, and the venom that would come from them on my social media amused me. I loved it. I thought it was funny.
I suppose in your defense, if you thought you were up to no good at the Trump Tower meeting in June of 2016, you wouldn't have put it on social media.
Right. I think I have enough intelligence to have known that.
Accompanying Goldstone was a woman he said could provide the incriminating information. Russian attorney Natalia Veselnitskaya.
She was very, very close to the state prosecutor in Russia, who himself is very close to Putin. She had mounted a really aggressive campaign against a law that had been passed by Congress and signed by Obama that was absolutely hated by Putin, and it was called the Magnitsky Act.
The Magnitsky Act allows the U.S. government to sanction Russian officials and business people believed to be human rights offenders.
The Magnitsky Act really sticks in Vladimir Putin's craw because it goes after his wealthy friends. It freezes their bank accounts. It makes it hard for them to travel, to do business in dollar denominations.
To retaliate, the Russian government stopped Americans from adopting Russian children. At Trump Tower, Veselnitskaya was there with 3 associates.
The other people on the Russian side, as it were, one was Renat Akhmechin. He's a Russian-American lobbyist. He is a former Soviet military officer who's been in the United States for many years, and he had been working with Veselnitskaya to lobby against the Magnitsky Act.
Also there, a translator and a business representative for the Agalarov family. At about 4 p.m., Goldstone and his companions boarded the Trump Tower elevator to the 25th floor conference room. In the meeting were Donald Trump Jr., his brother-in-law Jared Kushner, and Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort.
Don came out and saw these people. They went in, I said, "Thank you very much, I'm leaving." And he said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm leaving." He goes, "Why don't you just sit in so you can get these people out at the end?" I now find myself in the meeting itself.
So tell us what happened. Was the dirt on the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton forthcoming?
Not as far as I was aware. I decided I would use the opportunity to check my emails, just sit there, but to keep half an ear open. My eyes were definitely open because although I thought, well, I don't really know much about this subject, I'm smart enough that I'll be able to spot if there's a change in body language.
Goldstone says he noticed the mood deflate as the attorney talked about sanctions and the Magnitsky Act. It didn't sound like useful dirt on Hillary Clinton.
Jared Kushner, who was sitting next to me, looked like he was becoming more and more agitated as the attorney continued, at which point Jared Kushner said, "I have no idea what you're talking about. Could you possibly refocus?" And the attorney started again. Then she started talking about how unfair it was for the adoption of Russian children by Americans. Then my ears picked up because I was like, what is she talking about? What's adoption got to do with any of this? Don Jr. stood up and said, "I really don't know why you would address this to us. My father's a private citizen. I suggest you address it to the Obama administration. They're in power. They can perhaps do something."
Goldstone says he ushered the Russians out of the room. The meeting lasted about 20 minutes.
I jumped up and was like, "Thank you all very much. Thank you. Goodbye. We have to leave." And I was horrified.
The 3 Russians who were at the meeting have testified that Don Jr. asked specifically about where the dirt was on Hillary. Do you recall that?
No, not at all.
Did anyone in the meeting say, "Where's the dirt about Hillary"?
No.
So the Russians are not telling the truth.
If that's what they say.
That's what they testified to.
Veselnitskaya spoke to NBC News last year about the meeting.
I would say in one word, it was a disappointment of sorts.
NBC News obtained her talking points for the meeting. Most of the document is criticism of the Magnitsky Act. There's only one mention of Hillary Clinton in passing and regarding donations to the DNC.
It was, maybe for me, a completely insignificant part. At no point was there ever compromising material about Hillary Clinton. Not from my mouth, not from my documents.
An attorney for the Agalerovs tells NBC News that no one in the Russian government asked them to arrange the meeting. Jared Kushner's attorney, Abby Lowell, says his client went into the meeting not knowing what it was about, didn't participate, and left before it was over.
Jared was told about a meeting with his brother-in-law. No topic was mentioned. When Jared got into the room, the conversation was about Russian adoption. He was probably in the room for 10 or 12 minutes. What happened before he came in and what happened afterwards, he wasn't there to see.
When the meeting ended, Goldstone says he was worried he had annoyed Don Jr.
I said it was the most embarrassing thing, and I apologized. He said to me, "You know, I do lots of meetings, that's fine." It was kind of like, there, it's okay. But then he said to me, "I just have no idea what that was about."
Coming up, the story breaks.
Oh, come on. You didn't remember you'd offered dirt on Hillary Clinton from the Russian government?
It began with an offer for dirt and by many accounts ended up as a frustrating 20-minute conversation about sanctions and adoptions. So what were the Russians up to? The man who set it up has a theory.
So do you agree with national security officials, both prior and current, who believe that this meeting was a probe set up by the Russian government of the Trump campaign?
I've always looked at it as a bait and switch.
Goldstone says he thinks the offer of incriminating information was made just to get in the room.
But it was a dirty offer.
Yes.
It was a dirty offer that they accepted.
Yes. That is true. That didn't materialize, but yes. It's the willingness to accept it.
That willingness, intelligence experts say, may have been the whole point.
A lot of my sources, current and former intelligence officials, believe that this meeting was essentially a test by the Russian intelligence services to see how the Trump team would respond.
When you tell someone, we have dirt, you're testing the waters to see what the response is. And once you get a yes, a positive response to that, you have hooked your fish.
If it was a sophisticated intelligence operation, does that mean the Russian lawyer, Natalia Veselnitskaya, was a government operative? NBC News' Richard Engel asked her in the spring of 2018 about her government ties.
You said your relationship with the prosecutor general is what?
I am a lawyer, and I'm an informant.
She referred to herself as a government informer, and I think what she meant by that is that, like a lot of people in Russia, she does not work for the government, but when asked to provide information about things she's learned in the course of her work, she provides it.
What some of my sources have said is they wouldn't send the A-team if they were testing, because they don't know whether the Trump team's going to call the FBI and everyone's going to be arrested.
It's possible the Russian lawyer may not have known the real reason she was in the meeting.
If this were an intelligence operation, you might pick someone just like this Russian attorney. Her inability to make people happy at the meeting might be actually consistent with her being kind of an unwitting dupe. The untrained eye could look at this Trump Tower meeting and see a bunch of amateurs trying to get their own business done. But the counterintelligence lens tells us that this would be exactly how Putin would do it today.
What's more, Goldstone now says the Trump Tower meeting wasn't the end of it. He was asked to arrange meetings again after the election and around the inauguration.
So after this, as you paint it, really kind of a disastrous meeting, you get 2 more calls?
2 more emails, yes.
Asking to set up more meetings with the Trumps.
For the same person, for this attorney.
Goldstone says he didn't actively pursue it, and the story of the Trump Tower meeting might have stayed hidden, if not for the work of some investigative reporters. Joe Becker was part of a team at the New York Times who noticed something interesting in Jared Kushner's updated security clearance forms.
On this long list of contacts that he now gave to the FBI, he wrote that Natalia Veselnitskaya. That was it. And then Paul Manafort, the campaign chairman, had separately had to disclose to Congress that he'd met with some Russian official, I think is how he put it, at the request of Don Jr. So we were able to kind of piece this together, and at least Paul Manafort and the president's son had met with this person in the midst of a campaign to discuss what?
The Times reporters reached out for comment. What would Donald Trump Jr. say about the meeting?
We were told in a statement that Don Jr. gave us that this was simply a meeting to talk about Russian adoptions. And we thought, well, it's pretty high-level staffing for a meeting about Russian adoptions. It just didn't make sense.
It was a Washington Post reporter who tracked down Goldstone on vacation in Athens.
I was the first reporter to call him and ask him what his role was.
So I took the call, and it was a reporter from the Washington Post, and said to me, did you set up a meeting between some Russians and Donald Trump Jr. at Trump Tower? And I said, yes. And her next question was what she said to me, did you see the New York Times yesterday?
He was quite open. He sounded a little nervous, but he quite candidly said, yes, I set up the meeting and described the meeting. The one thing he did not want to say in that first phone call is he said he had done it on behalf of a Russian client, but he did not want to name the client.
When I first was asked again about this meeting, the only thing I could remember was adoption.
Come on, you didn't remember you'd offered dirt on Hillary Clinton from the Russian government?
Well, I didn't remember that. That's not the meeting, that's the email. But what the meeting actually transpired, the only thing that sat with me was, it was that ridiculous meeting about adoption.
Goldstone says he continued on with his vacation.
So I went shopping and tried on crowns and took selfies, and it was more hats.
And you posted them?
And I posted them.
You were not getting it.
I was not getting it, no.
It wasn't long before someone slipped Goldstone's email exchange with Don Jr. to the New York Times reporters.
I mean, my jaw dropped. I mean, there it was in black and white.
Once again, they reached out for comment. What would Donald Trump Jr. say now?
We called them in the morning and said we'd obtained the emails. We were prepared to publish them. Then Don Jr. started tweeting out these hastily photographed images of these emails. It was clearly an attempt to make a claim that they were doing this in the effort to be transparent. Of course, if they wanted to be transparent, they could have told the truth on day 1 or day 2 or day 3. But they didn't.
In a startling admission, Donald Trump Jr. releasing emails today.
Each day, new bits of information that were damaging to the White House and damaging to Donald Trump Jr. were starting to trickle out.
Within weeks, a new allegation emerged. That first statement from Don Jr. saying the meeting was just about adoption, it came from his father.
He's flying home on Air Force One as they're scrambling and trying to figure out what to say about this. And apparently, he actually essentially dictated the wording of the statement and decided what his son should say.
The president denied it at first, but later changed his story in a memo his lawyers sent to Robert Mueller.
And that seems to be an important focus of Robert Mueller's investigation. Why did President Trump dictate this misleading statement delivered on his son's behalf about this meeting that Trump says he knew nothing about at the time?
What did the president know about the meeting, and when did he know it? That's a question the special counsel's team surely wants to answer. Coming up,
I told myself that if Bob Mueller appeared, I would literally just throw my hands forward and say, just arrest me.
Agree to accept the meeting. What was the state of mind of the Trump team? And they're also looking at it through the lens of obstruction of justice. Why were misleading things said about this meeting?
If the president had a hand, and it appears he did, in drafting a false statement as to the true meaning of the Trump Tower meeting, then the special counsel is asking, is this obstruction of justice?
not long after the Trump Tower sit-down, music publicist Rob Goldstone ended his working relationship with Russian pop singer Emin Agalarov. But questions about his role at the meeting catapulted Goldstone into the middle of the Russia probe.
It was Goldstone who wrote the email on behalf of the Russians who wanted to meet with Donnie Jr. to share dirt on Hillary Clinton.
Goldstone first testified on Capitol Hill. Then the special counsel came calling, asking him to respond to questions as a voluntary witness.
Tell us what it was like inside that room when you went in to face the Mueller lawyers.
The publicist part of me thought it would be this glamorous thing. It would be at the J. Edgar Hoover building, and it would be some incredible, almost like some Perry Mason experience. Anyway, it was in some unmarked building in a bland conference room.
Was Mr. Mueller himself there?
No, and I told myself in advance that if Bob Mueller appeared, I would literally just throw my hands forward and say, just arrest me, because I'd heard that he hadn't shown up at anyone else's.
Goldstone says Mueller's lawyers peppered him with questions, many dealing with the relationships that appeared to tie Trump to Russia.
My connection to the Trumps, Trump's connection to the Agalarovs, Agalarovs' connections to the Kremlin, Trump's connections to the Kremlin, to the Agalarovs. It all made perfect sense what they would want to talk about, and I was able to fill in as much as I knew.
Next, Goldstone agreed to again be a voluntary witness, this time in front of Robert Mueller's grand jury.
I was picked up by 2 FBI agents and driven to an underground entrance to yet another unremarkable building. The room is like a schoolroom. It has 3 tiers. It was like a lecture room in a college. There were about 22 or 23 people there across the 3 tiers.
What do you think they wanted you to tell that grand jury? I mean, the truth, of course, but what was the case? What's the case?
I think that one of the things that they definitely needed me to enlighten the grand jury about was the thing I get asked about all the time, but haven't really spoken about until now, which is, what was the reasoning for writing the email the way I did? And why did I use certain phrases that I did?
New revelations may also be coming from a source once in Trump's inner circle.
Paul Manafort pleading guilty today to 2 charges as part of a plea deal.
Paul Manafort is now cooperating with Robert Mueller's investigation. His presence at the meeting looms large.
Paul Manafort is a man with a lot of Russian connections. He knew exactly how the Russians operate, and he should have known what was happening there and why that meeting was perilous.
The question of knowingly cooperating with a foreign power to influence the election, to assist and support the campaign, that's the big question that Mueller's going to try to answer through Manafort.
What about Clinton?
Whatever happened before, during, and after the meeting, Robert Mueller now has multiple witnesses spilling secrets. Rob Goldstone insists he never meant to be part of a Russian plot, but what he offered may provide evidence of whether any Trump campaign officials wanted to join one. Whatever came of the meeting, Goldstone says he's living with the consequences of one very bad idea.
Are you guilty of anything?
I'm guilty really of not standing my ground and knowing that this was a bad idea. That's what I'm guilty of not really putting my sensible hat on and going, you know this is a bad idea, don't do it.